She barely spoke during training rotations. But one morning, someone noticed her patch, not standard issue, not even from this branch. And when they searched its origin, jaws dropped. Because the patch belonged to a unit that didn't officially exist. They thought she was just another quiet medical officer. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had been assigned to Naval Special Warfare Training Center for exactly 4 weeks, moving through her daily routines with the kind of professional silence that made her practically invisible. At 5 feet 2 inches and 110 pounds, with auburn hair always pulled back in a perfect regulation bun and green eyes that seemed to notice everything while revealing nothing, she looked like every other competent military nurse they'd encountered. She carried her medical supplies with practiced efficiency, treated injuries with clinical precision, and maintained the kind of low profile that made most people forget she was even there. The SEAL candidates had learned to work around her presence without really acknowledging it. She was medical support, nothing more. They knew she was competent at her job, professional in her interactions, and reliable in her medical assessments. But none of them had ever wondered about her background, her previous assignments, or what experiences had shaped her into the person she'd become. To them, she was simply another military nurse doing her job, quiet, efficient, and completely unremarkable. But sometimes the most unremarkable people carry the most remarkable secrets. Welcome to Silent Salute, where we discover that extraordinary capabilities often hide behind the most ordinary appearances. Before we continue this incredible story, tell us in the comments which country you're watching from today. And if you believe that the most dangerous assumptions are those we make about people who seem completely ordinary, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're honored to share these remarkable stories with you. Class 267 was particularly demanding. 24 candidates from diverse military backgrounds, all pushing themselves through training designed to break all but the most determined warriors. The daily routine was relentless, brutal physical conditioning, underwater demolition exercises, tactical simulations, and psychological challenges that tested every aspect of human endurance. Through it all, Lieutenant Mitchell moved quietly in the background, providing medical support with the same steady competence that had characterized her entire assignment. The candidates had developed their standard assumptions about her. She was professional, knowledgeable about medical procedures, and dependable in her support role. But she was also remarkably quiet, speaking only when necessary and never engaging in the casual conversations that typically developed between medical personnel and the candidates they supported. Her silence wasn't unfriendly. It was simply complete professional focus that left no room for personal interaction. Among the candidates was Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison, a former Marine Corps infantry sergeant who'd served multiple combat deployments before applying for SEAL training. Morrison was respected by his fellow candidates for his tactical knowledge and leadership abilities, but he shared the common assumption that medical personnel were essentially support staff who operated outside the warrior culture that defined special operations. "She's good at what she does," Morrison had commented to his teammate during their 3rd week, "but she's probably the quietest person I've ever met. I don't think I've heard her say more than 10 words that weren't directly related to medical procedures." Petty Officer Rodriguez, who'd served as a hospital corpsman before SEAL training, offered some perspective. "Some medical personnel are just focused on their work, Morrison. Doesn't mean they don't understand what we're doing out here." But Morrison's observation was accurate. Lieutenant Mitchell's silence was unusual even for military medical personnel. Most doctors and nurses developed some level of personal interaction with the personnel they supported, but Lieutenant Mitchell maintained a professional distance that was almost impersonal. The situation that would change everything began during the 5th week of training when Class 267 was scheduled for advanced close-quarters combat exercises. This was one of the most intense phases of SEAL training, where candidates learned hand-to-hand combat techniques, weapons retention, and defensive tactics that could mean the difference between life and death in operational environments. Lieutenant Mitchell was assigned to provide medical support for the training evolution, positioned at a safe distance from the combat exercises, but close enough to respond immediately if serious injuries occurred. Her role was essentially observational. Monitor the candidates for signs of serious injury, be prepared for emergency medical treatment, and ensure that anyone hurt received immediate care. The training was being conducted in a specialized facility designed for realistic combat scenarios. The exercises were carefully controlled, with multiple safety protocols and experienced instructors supervising every aspect of the training. But close-quarters combat training always carried inherent risks of serious injury that required immediate medical attention. During a break in the training exercises, Petty Officer Davis was examining his equipment when he noticed something unusual about Lieutenant Mitchell's uniform. Specifically, there was a small patch on her left shoulder that he didn't recognize, not a standard military unit patch, not a medical certification, and not anything he'd seen before in his 8 years of military service. "Hey Morrison," Davis said quietly. "Take a look at that patch on the doc's uniform. You ever seen anything like that before?" Morrison looked over at Lieutenant Mitchell, who was organizing her medical supplies with her usual quiet efficiency. The patch Davis was referring to was small and subtle, positioned where unit patches were typically worn, but it was unlike anything Morrison had encountered in his military career. The patch was black with what appeared to be a stylized dagger surrounded by wings, with text that was too small to read from a distance. But what made it unusual was that it didn't match any known military unit insignia, and it seemed to be made from different material than standard military patches. "I've never seen anything like that," Morrison admitted. "It's not Army, not Marine Corps, not Navy, not Air Force. And it's definitely not a medical patch." Davis was intrigued. Maybe it's from her previous assignment. Should we ask her about it? Morrison considered the suggestion, but Lieutenant Mitchell's consistent silence made him hesitant to initiate personal conversation. She doesn't seem to like talking about anything that's not medical related. Might be better to leave it alone. But Davis's curiosity was stronger than his social restraint. During the next break in training, he approached Lieutenant Mitchell with what he hoped was casual interest. "Ma'am," Davis said, "I noticed that patch on your uniform. I don't recognize the unit insignia. Where did you serve before this assignment?" Lieutenant Mitchell looked up from her medical supplies, and for just a moment, Davis saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a brief flash of what might have been wariness or calculation. But it was gone so quickly that he might have imagined it. "Previous assignment," she replied simply, then returned to organizing her equipment. Davis pressed gently. "I mean, what unit was it? I've served in a lot of different places, but I don't recognize that patch." Lieutenant Mitchell's response was professional but uninformative. "Classified assignment. I'm not authorized to discuss details." The word classified immediately got Morrison's attention. Most military assignments had some level of classification, but Lieutenant Mitchell's response suggested something more significant than routine operational security. "Ma'am," Morrison said, "I've had classified assignments too, but I can usually at least mention what type of unit or what branch of service. Is there anything you can tell us about your background?" Lieutenant Mitchell looked at both candidates with the kind of measured assessment that made them suddenly uncomfortable. "My previous assignments are not appropriate for discussion. Is there anything medical-related I can help you with?" Her tone was polite but firm, clearly indicating that the conversation was over. Davis and Morrison exchanged glances, recognizing that they'd encountered something unusual. Later that evening, Davis and Morrison discussed what they'd learned. "That patch definitely isn't standard military," Davis said. And her response about classified assignments was more evasive than I've ever heard from anyone, including people with top-secret clearances. Morrison was equally puzzled. She said she wasn't authorized to discuss details. That's language you use when talking about black operations or special access programs. Their conversation was overheard by several other candidates, who became interested in the mystery of Lieutenant Mitchell's unusual patch. Over the next few days, various candidates tried to get glimpses of the patch and research its origin. Petty Officer Chun, who had extensive experience with military intelligence, got the closest look at the patch during a medical examination. "It's definitely not any standard military unit patch," he reported to his teammates. "The material is different, the construction is different, and the insignia doesn't match anything in the official databases." Staff Sergeant Williams, who'd served with multiple special operations units, was equally puzzled. "I've worked with Delta Force, Rangers, Special Forces, and SEALs. I've never seen anything like that patch." The mystery deepened when Rodriguez tried to research the patch's origin using military databases. "I searched every unit insignia database I could access," he reported. "That patch doesn't exist in any official military records." The possibility that Lieutenant Mitchell's patch represented a unit that didn't officially exist created significant interest among the candidates. They began paying more attention to her behavior, looking for clues about her background and previous assignments. What they noticed was that Lieutenant Mitchell's professional competence extended far beyond normal medical training. She demonstrated knowledge of tactical procedures, situational awareness that exceeded typical medical personnel, and a level of physical fitness that suggested training beyond standard military medical requirements. The situation reached a crisis point during the 6th week of training when the facility experienced a serious security incident. A former military contractor with mental health issues had gained unauthorized access to the training compound and was threatening personnel with a military-style knife. The incident began during a routine training evolution when the intruder appeared in the training area, clearly agitated and carrying a large tactical knife. Security personnel were responding, but the intruder was positioned between them and several candidates who were conducting training exercises. "Everyone down," the intruder shouted, waving the knife in threatening gestures. "I've got something to prove to you special operations heroes." The candidates immediately recognized the serious nature of the threat. The intruder was clearly disturbed, armed with a dangerous weapon, and positioned where he could harm multiple people before security forces could intervene. Lieutenant Mitchell was at her medical station approximately 20 feet from the intruder, close enough to be in immediate danger, but far enough away that she could potentially avoid confrontation by remaining still and quiet. Instead, she did something that shocked everyone in the training area. Lieutenant Mitchell moved toward the intruder with the kind of calm, deliberate approach that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't call for help, didn't seek cover, and didn't attempt to escape. She simply walked directly toward an armed, mentally disturbed individual with the confidence of someone who had dealt with similar situations before. "Sir," she said in a calm, steady voice, "I'm a medical officer. I can see that you're distressed. Let me help you." The intruder turned toward her, raising the knife in a threatening gesture. "Stay back. I don't need help from anyone." But Lieutenant Mitchell continued moving closer, her hands visible and empty, her voice remaining calm and professional. "I understand you're upset, but threatening people isn't going to solve your problems. Let's talk about what's really bothering you." What happened next took less than 5 seconds, but demonstrated capabilities that none of the candidates had suspected. The intruder lunged toward Lieutenant Mitchell with the knife, clearly intending to cause serious harm. But instead of retreating or calling for help, Lieutenant Mitchell responded with speed and precision that defied everything the candidates thought they knew about their quiet nurse. She sidestepped the knife attack with fluid movement that suggested extensive training in close-quarters combat. As the intruder's momentum carried him past her, she grabbed his wrist with one hand and delivered a precise strike to his elbow with the other, causing him to drop the knife immediately. Before the intruder could recover, Lieutenant Mitchell had moved behind him, applied a chokehold that rendered him unconscious in seconds, and lowered him safely to the ground. She then secured the weapon and checked the intruder's vital signs with the same professional competence she'd shown during routine medical procedures. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. The intruder had gone from threatening multiple people with a deadly weapon to being safely neutralized and receiving medical care. The training area was completely silent. 24 SEAL candidates, multiple instructors, and security personnel stood frozen, staring at a 110-pound nurse who had just neutralized an armed attacker with techniques that exceeded the capabilities of most military personnel. Security forces arrived moments later to find the situation completely under control. Lieutenant Mitchell was providing medical care to the unconscious intruder while maintaining security of the weapon, demonstrating the kind of integrated response that characterized the most elite military units. Master Chief Petty Officer Thompson, the senior instructor who'd witnessed the entire incident, approached Lieutenant Mitchell with an expression of complete amazement. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Thompson said, "where did you learn those techniques?" Lieutenant Mitchell's response was characteristically understated. "Previous training, Master Chief. I've had some experience with hostile individuals." But Thompson had been in special operations for 20 years, and he recognized advanced close-quarters combat techniques when he saw them. "Lieutenant, what you just demonstrated was sophisticated CQC training. That's not standard medical personnel training." Lieutenant Mitchell continued providing medical care to the intruder while responding. I've received additional training to enhance my effectiveness in challenging environments. Thompson was clearly understanding that Lieutenant Mitchell's additional training was far more extensive than she was indicating. Lieutenant, would you mind if I asked about your background? Those techniques were extremely advanced. For the first time since her assignment to the training facility, Lieutenant Mitchell seemed to be considering how much information to share. Master Chief, my previous assignments required specialized training that included defensive tactics and threat neutralization. The candidates were processing what they'd witnessed, trying to understand how their quiet nurse had demonstrated combat capabilities that exceeded their own training. Morrison approached Lieutenant Mitchell with obvious respect. Ma'am, what you just did was incredible. Where did you learn to handle armed attackers like that? Lieutenant Mitchell's response maintained operational security while providing some insight. Previous assignments involved high-risk environments where medical personnel needed additional capabilities to ensure mission success. But Morrison was beginning to understand that Lieutenant Mitchell's background was far more complex than anyone had realized. Ma'am, those weren't just defensive techniques. You neutralized an armed threat with the kind of precision that suggests extensive training. Chun, who'd been trying to identify Lieutenant Mitchell's patch, stepped forward with new understanding. Ma'am, that patch on your uniform. It's not from any standard military unit, is it? Lieutenant Mitchell looked at Chun with the kind of measured assessment that suggested she was calculating how much information to reveal. The patch represents a specialized assignment that's not part of standard military organization. The phrase specialized assignment, combined with her demonstration of advanced combat techniques, was creating a clear picture for the candidates. They were beginning to understand that Lieutenant Mitchell had been assigned to units that operated outside normal military structures. Rodriguez, who'd been unable to find any information about the patch, asked the question everyone was thinking. Ma'am, are you saying that patch represents a unit that doesn't officially exist? Lieutenant Mitchell's response was carefully worded. I'm saying that some military assignments require operational security measures that extend beyond standard classification levels. The implication was clear. Lieutenant Mitchell had served with units that were so classified that they didn't appear in official military records. Later that day, Master Chief Thompson requested a private meeting with Lieutenant Mitchell to discuss the incident and her background. Lieutenant Mitchell, Thompson began, I need to understand your capabilities and background. What you demonstrated today suggests training that goes far beyond standard medical personnel. Lieutenant Mitchell had clearly decided that some level of transparency was necessary. Master Chief, I've served in assignments that required integration of medical and tactical capabilities. The training I received was designed to enable medical personnel to operate independently in high-risk environments. Thompson was beginning to understand the implications. Lieutenant, are you saying you've been assigned to special operations units? I'm saying I've received training that enabled me to provide medical support in environments where traditional medical protocols couldn't be applied effectively. Thompson pressed for more details. Lieutenant, your techniques today were consistent with advanced special operations training. Can you provide any information about your previous assignments? Lieutenant Mitchell's response reflected the balance between transparency and operational security. Master Chief, I've served with units that conducted operations requiring specialized medical support. The training I received included capabilities that enabled me to function effectively in tactical environments. Thompson was recognizing that Lieutenant Mitchell was being deliberately vague about assignments that were clearly highly classified. Lieutenant, would you be willing to discuss how your background might contribute to SEAL training? Lieutenant Mitchell considered the question carefully. Master Chief, I believe my experience could contribute to developing more realistic training scenarios that better prepare candidates for operational realities. Thompson was intrigued by the possibility. Lieutenant, what kind of training scenarios are you thinking about? Scenarios where medical personnel need to operate independently in hostile environments, where traditional medical protocols can't be applied, and where medical and tactical responsibilities intersect. Thompson understood that Lieutenant Mitchell was offering to share training methodologies that came from highly classified operational experience. Lieutenant, I'm very interested in developing such training programs. Would you be willing to work with our training staff to develop enhanced scenarios? Lieutenant Mitchell accepted the opportunity, understanding that her unique background could contribute to SEAL training in ways that would enhance operational effectiveness. The announcement of Lieutenant Mitchell's expanded role created significant interest throughout the training command. The incident with the knife-wielding intruder had established her credibility as someone with exceptional capabilities, and her willingness to contribute to enhanced training confirmed that her experience was valued. Morrison approached Lieutenant Mitchell after the announcement. "Ma'am, after seeing what you did with that intruder, several of us have been wondering about your background. Would you be willing to share some insights about operating in high-risk environments?" Lieutenant Mitchell appreciated Morrison's professional interest. "Morrison, my expanded role will include developing training scenarios that reflect realistic operational challenges. You'll be experiencing that training as part of your curriculum." Morrison pressed for more details. "Ma'am, what you demonstrated wasn't just training, it was real-world experience with hostile situations. How did you develop those capabilities?" Lieutenant Mitchell decided that some transparency would be beneficial. "Morrison, I've been assigned to units that operated in environments where medical personnel faced the same threats as tactical personnel. You can't provide effective medical support if you can't survive the operational environment." Morrison was impressed by Lieutenant Mitchell's integrated approach. "Ma'am, do you think all medical personnel should receive tactical training? I think medical personnel who support special operations should understand that medical emergencies don't occur in controlled environments. They happen in the middle of complex, dangerous situations where medical and tactical capabilities must be integrated." 8 weeks later, Lieutenant Mitchell's integrated training program culminated in an exercise that demonstrated the full scope of her capabilities and changed how SEAL candidates understood the relationship between medical and tactical operations. The scenario involved a simulated hostage rescue where medical personnel had to operate independently in hostile territory, provide care under enemy fire, and maintain tactical effectiveness while managing medical emergencies. Lieutenant Mitchell participated as both medical provider and tactical team member, demonstrating the kind of integrated capabilities that amazed everyone involved in the exercise. She moved through hostile territory with the tactical awareness of special operations personnel, provided advanced medical care under fire, neutralized threats that endangered patients, and coordinated evacuation procedures that balanced medical and tactical requirements. When the exercise concluded, Lieutenant Mitchell briefed the candidates on lessons learned from integrated medical tactical operations in hostile environments. "Gentlemen," Lieutenant Mitchell began, "real-world operations don't separate medical and tactical responsibilities. Medical personnel who support special operations must be prepared to function as full team members, not just as support staff who require protection." She continued, "Your medical personnel need to understand your tactical situation, and you need to understand their medical requirements. Success depends on integration, not separation, of capabilities." Master Chief Thompson, who had observed the entire exercise, addressed the candidates. "Lieutenant Mitchell's performance demonstrates the kind of integrated capability that defines successful special operations. Her background with specialized units has provided training methodologies that will enhance your effectiveness in actual operations." He looked around at the candidates who were processing the implications of what they'd witnessed. Lieutenant Mitchell's patch represents service with units that operate at the highest levels of classification. Her willingness to share that experience with you is an extraordinary opportunity. The candidates began to understand that Lieutenant Mitchell's quiet professionalism had concealed experience with units that operated outside normal military structures, units that didn't officially exist but conducted operations essential to national security. Lieutenant Mitchell's training programs were eventually adopted throughout Special Operations Commands, establishing new standards for integrated medical tactical capability. Her methods influenced military training worldwide and enhanced the effectiveness of special operations personnel globally. But perhaps Lieutenant Mitchell's greatest contribution was demonstrating that true operational effectiveness required integration of all capabilities rather than separation of medical and tactical functions. Her experience with classified units had provided insights that enhanced training for officially recognized special operations forces. The quiet nurse who had seemed unremarkable proved to be one of the most experienced and capable individuals in special operations. Her background with units that didn't officially exist had prepared her to contribute to training that would enhance the effectiveness of units that did. Years later, when Lieutenant Mitchell transitioned to other assignments, she carried the knowledge that she'd contributed to developing more effective special operations training. Her experience with classified units had enhanced the capabilities of recognized special operations forces. But she also carried the satisfaction of having proven that the most valuable contributors were often those whose backgrounds couldn't be officially acknowledged, whose patches represented units that didn't exist, and whose capabilities had been developed in operations that would never be publicly recognized. This story was brought to you by Silent Salute. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet competence concealed experience with organizations or operations that couldn't be officially acknowledged? Someone whose background suggested capabilities that exceeded normal training and experience? Tell us in the comments about the individuals who surprised you with their hidden backgrounds and unofficial expertise. And if you believe that the most capable people are often those whose full experience can't be officially recognized, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. Every story reminds us that extraordinary capabilities often hide behind ordinary appearances, and that the most dangerous assumptions are those we make about people whose true backgrounds remain classified. We'll see you in the next story, where we'll discover another incredible tale of hidden capability and undisclosed experience.